Hello, everyone. And thank you for joining our second CFR training webinar session for the 2021-2022 fiscal year consolidated fiscal report. Yesterday's session went well. We went over some good topics, especially in regards to the new CFRS web platform. And we also had a pretty good sized crowd. That session's recording will be posted shortly, along with today's session on YouTube. We will send an email out to all providers notifying them of when they're available and where they can be found. Today, we'll have, approximately 700 attendees again, maybe not. We're right around 420 right now. So hopefully today's session is just as beneficial for you. My name is Ken Glenmeyer. I'm one of the representatives from OPWDD, and I will be hosting the event today. Other state agency representatives will be as follows. Representing OASAS is Paul Green and Paul Sutton. Representing OMH is Richard Brooks, Michelle Chilinsky, Kathy Katz, and Lisa Vickery. Also representing OPWDD will be Francis Facilio, Alpa Amin, and Emily Seward. Representing SED is Nelly Gutos and John Hart. And then representing Department of Health is Jeff Nickerson. Today's session covers the utilities menu, general and agency-specific changes, highlights, supplementals, the COVID schedules, and then claims reporting DMH2 and 3. So this slide is important, and if you attended yesterday, you're aware of this function. Within WebEx, there's a Q&A function. What happens is you could ask your questions, and we will answer them. Not today, but we'll answer them, and we will post those answers online. If you don't know where the Q&A function is on the WebEx, it's at the bottom right of your screen. It should say Q&A, and you can click it. It might be a drop-down box. If you don't see it, it's probably, there's 3 little dots at the bottom right corner. Click that, and then click Q&A, and it should pop up. And then you could ask your questions, and like I said, we'll answer them as soon as possible, and we will post those answers online so that everyone has the ability to see it. This slide goes over the contact information. Most of us are still working remote, at least hybrid schedule, so where we're in office and out of office. So most of us, or all state agencies, prefer email contact. This slide goes over the claims contact information. Once again, email contact is preferred as these individuals are also working a hybrid schedule. And these are the goals of what we hope to accomplish throughout this training. We hope to provide contact information for specific questions not covered during this training session. We want to identify any major changes that have occurred since the release of the last reporting period. We want to discuss important policies, principles, and rules regarding completion of the CFR via the CFRS web, which is going to be new for this reporting period. We want to provide guidance regarding the completion of the COVID schedules. And we also want to help providers become familiar with the claiming and supplemental schedules. So I'll pass on to the first panelist today, and then we can begin.
Good morning. My name is Francis Facilio. I work for the Office of Mental, OPWDD. I forgot where I work, in the CFR unit. What you're looking at now is the utilities menu. Couple of overall quick things to note. One is, as opposed to desktop, the opportunity to print any of the schedules is included in the utilities menu now. You'll also note that there's an option here for for the submit feature. We discussed yesterday a way to submit through another process. Keep in mind you can't submit unless you have been designated with a submitter role and the DCN has been assigned. So the first option off that menu was to transfer DMH1 to DMH2. You can see here that it's from this menu that you can determine the method of allocation. If you're trying to just transfer for specific counties or what percentage for specific counties, that's all handled through the utilities through this option. Some of the larger providers like to import data from their ledger or from text files. That's part of utilities, and there's a help button that is the help is very detailed with some more information of how you can go about doing that as opposed to entering the data directly. As opposed to exporting or importing, you can also export information from your schedules. You also using the utilities, you choose that option. You can choose which schedules you want to export, and what you'll see is it comes out in a sort of spreadsheet format, which you can then save as an Excel file or whatever. And sometimes this is useful to take a look at your personal service costs for programs and so forth. If you need to change a funding source code, you can do that through utilities. You see to the right the pencils and trash can. If you're wanting to delete a funding source for one of your programs, you hit the trash can button at that line. If you need to make any edits on the funding source information, you can choose the pencil to get in and edit it. DCN. So after you've created your CFR and validated, a document control number is assigned. This is the key for all your filing, because when you send us certifications, the document control number has to match, at the bottom of those certs has to match the file that you upload to us. So do not print certifications till you're ready to upload a CFR. I've seen every reporting period, the deadline comes and there's some people who are sending us signed certifications with no DCN at the bottom, or they printed them, then they went back in to make a change. Of course, that eliminates the DCN. They have to revalidate, they get a new DCN, but they still send us the schedule, the certifications from the previous DCN, which are no longer valid. So the DCN is an important part of the process. If you want to, at the utilities, you validate your submission, which means it's going to go through and do some checking on what you've entered, and the final validation and assign a DCN. You're very lucky if you don't get a screen with items that need to be addressed the first time you try to validate. You'll notice that there are some marked as failure and some marked as warning. A warning is just letting you know that you may have forgotten to do something, or you may have entered it incorrectly, but you can go ahead, and if what you put in there is what you wanted to put in there, you can go ahead and validate if you only have a warning. Failures must be corrected before a DCN can be assigned. And normally you can press the line that you're getting a failure, and it'll take you to that portion of the CFR where you can make any corrections that need to be made. Once you amended all the items that need to be corrected, you'll get a notice like this that tells you you've passed final validation and the DCN has been assigned. Don't be confused. This does not mean that we have it and that you filed it. It just means the DCN has been assigned. You still have to go through the submission process to meet the filing deadlines. Once you've passed final validation and had a DCN assigned, that DCN will appear in the work in progress listing with the note that you see there towards the bottom right that says DCN with the number assigned but not yet submitted. And if you click on that line of the one that has been assigned but not submitted, you have options. You can view it some more. You can edit it, although if you edit, the DCN will change and you'll have to go through the validation again. Or you can submit the submission. Once you hit submit, and again, you can't submit unless your security manager has designated you with the submitter role. And that applies not just to submitting the CFR, but also forwarding signed certification pages or the financial statement or the parent agency admin allocation information. So you may want to make sure that there's more than one person around who has that submitter role designation. Once you submit and you get a notice, are you sure you want to submit? And you say yes, then you get a confirmation there on the screen that says that it has been submitted. At that point, that CFR with that DCN will appear in the reporting period as one of the CFRs that's been submitted to the state. If you click on the arrow to the left of each of those periods, you can see each of the DCNs that were submitted to the state for each period. Another option off utilities is to add or subtract state agencies. Suppose you went through the create CFR process, brought in data from a previous period, then you realized that you were fed up with dealing with me and you no longer wanted to do business with OPWDD, so you need to uncheck that, and you can, the new CFR you've created will still be there, but you're in the process of taking the OPWDD data out of it. Likewise, if you forgot that you're now doing business with DOH, you would check that box, and that would add them to the CFR. You're going to get a note that says if you're adding a state agency, you're going to have to go in and select the programs for that state agency that are going to be included in the CFR. And if you're removing an agency, all the information, all the program sites for that state-funded agency are going to disappear. And so you have to say yes or no, you want to proceed at that point. If you are using utilities and attempting to create a new CFR for a period, but somebody has already gone in and started revising a CFR for that period, you can't have more than one CFR for the same period, reporting period, in the work in progress at the same time. So if you get an error message like this, it means you have to go in there, and if you want to proceed, you have to go in there and delete the one that was already started. Printing schedules. As I said, you now print out of the utilities options. When you're printing, you can select which of the schedules you want to print. It's going to show you all the expected. You remember from the desktop, one of the options was to, you could hit the button for expected, and then all the schedules that you had data entered would appear. With the CFR web, it's only going to give you the list of the ones that have data entered into them. Now, you may not want to print your whole CFR. You may just be wanting to print those certification schedules, in which case you click those the boxes to the left of each of the schedules, and you can go ahead and print them. Now, we know that it's all set up to print on legal size paper, and not everybody has printers anymore that print legal. You can always print the PDF, and once you print the PDF, you can get in and adjust the paper size. You may, depending on the PDF process you're using, you may need to go in and select a button to shrink all the data to appear on the new paper size. Otherwise, it may just cut off data that stretches beyond the size of letter size paper that would go on to legal size. But by going through the PDF process, you have a lot more options there of how you print. In addition to printing individual schedules, there are some other pre-defined options for you, reports that you can print out. You see some of the listings up there, total expenses, total by program type, et cetera, et cetera. You may only want to look at the expenses you reported to OASAS, and you can only check that box if you want. These are just some options that you have to through the print, and we've set these reports up for you. That's the end of my section, and I'm going to transfer to the next presenter.
Thank you, Francis. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lisa Vickery, and I work in the CFR unit at the Office of Mental Health. I'll be presenting CFR highlights, changes, and supplementals. Oops, sorry. Okay. Changes from the previous CFR manual are detailed in the 21-22 transmittal letter and can be found on the SED website at the link provided. It is important to be mindful of the changes listed in the transmittal letter when completing the CFR. Changes in funding source codes or program codes may require immediate corrections when carrying data forward from a prior version of the CFR software to CFRS Web. Top 10 internal controls to prevent and detect fraud. A KPMG fraud survey found that organizations are reporting more experiences of fraud than in prior years, and that 3 out of 4 organizations have uncovered fraud. The New York State Office of Mental Health Bureau of Audit has provided the following list of internal controls to assist you in preventing and detecting fraud at your agency. Separation of duties. This ensures that no one person has control over all parts of a financial transaction. Monthly bank reconciliations. Verify all charges made to credit cards or accounts were business related. Provide Board of Directors oversight of agency operations and management. Prepare all fiscal policies and procedures in writing and obtain the Board of Directors approval. Ensure that agency assets and other agency resources are used only for official business. Protect petty cash funds and other cash funds. Keep patient funds separate from petty cash funds. Protect checks against fraudulent use. Require 2 signatures on checks above a specified limit. Protect cash and check collections. Reconcile cash receipts daily with appropriate documentation. Avoid or discourage related party transactions. Detailed information can be found on the OMH website at the link provided. Previous recordings of the CFR training presentations are available at the YouTube links provided. The recordings are divided into 2 sessions. Depending on your agency's needs, you have the option to view one or both. The current CFR training presentation recording will be added to the OPWDD YouTube page on a date to be determined. Written responses to question and answers from previous CFR training presentations can be found at the OMH website under the CFR FAQ section at the link provided. Written responses to the questions and answers from the current CFR training presentation will be added to the OMH website at a date to be determined. Changes in the CFR manual. The general CFR submission requirements of the CFR manual were updated as follows. All CFR submission types must be prepared using CFRS Web. Signed and dated certification schedules and financial statements should be submitted electronically through CFRS Web. Certification schedules with an electronic signature must be submitted through CFRS Web. The general instructions were updated as follows. The reference and link to the Consolidated Budget Reporting and Claiming Manual, or CBR manual, was removed from the CFR resource section. General SED instructions related to one-to-one teacher aid were updated. The MTA, Metropolitan Commuter Mobility Tax, abbreviation and name was revised to MCTMT, Metropolitan Commuter Transportation Mobility Tax. A FAQ related to non-allowable advertising costs was added, and an FAQ related to workforce stabilization initiatives were added. This is the FAQ regarding non-allowable advertising costs. Question, are advertising costs related to the general public that seek to increase patient utilization allowed? Answer, per the Provider Reimbursement Manual, costs of advertising to the general public which seeks to increase patient utilization of the provider's facilities are not allowable. The FAQ related to OPWDD workforce stabilization initiatives will be discussed in the OPWDD agency-specific section of the presentation. Certification language for the CFR-II and CFR-IA schedules was revised to comply with the requirements of Statement of Auditing Standards, SAS 134. The description of CFR-1, line 72B, Medicaid Managed Care, was revised. CFR-3, line 65 instructions were revised regarding OMH programs. DMH-1 instructions for full filers were revised. DMH-3 had additional instructions added regarding lines 16 through 18. The details of the Section 23 change will be presented in the explanation of the DMH-3. Changes in the appendix. Appendix R of the CFR manual was updated as follows. Job Title Code 603 was revised to include Chief Financial Officer. Position Title Code 208 was revised from OASAS only to OASAS and OMH only. Electronic signature. E-sign certifications must be uploaded through CFRS Web, and the checkbox attestation must be selected accordingly. This is the signature attestation for the certification pages. OMH supplementals, changes, and highlights. OMH has 4 supplemental schedules: the OMH-1, OMH-2, OMH-3, and OMH-4. The OMH-1, Units of Service by Program and Site, is used to report the total units of service of the OMH program. Refer to Appendix F to determine the correct units of service for each OMH program. The total units of service on OMH-1 will transfer to Schedules CFR-1 line 13 and DMH-1 line 3. The total units of service on OMH-1 must match the aggregate total units of service on DMH-3 for the same program. It's very important to report accurate units of service. They're used to determine cost per unit of service for financial planning. The OMH-1 is only completed by OMH providers that file a full CFR. Select a program and site from the drop-down boxes. To report information for other programs, repeat the steps to select program and site. CFRS Web will automatically save the data. Once all the data is entered, choose Next Schedule to continue. Schedule OMH-2, Medicaid Units of Service by Program and Site, is completed for program sites that accrued Medicaid fee-for-service or Medicaid managed care revenue for services provided. Units of service are reported separately for Medicaid managed care and Medicaid fee-for-service. The total program units of service reported for Medicaid fee-for-service and Medicaid managed care will transfer from the OMH-2 to Schedule CFR-1, lines 13A and 13B, respectively. The Medicaid units of service on the OMH-2 should not be more than the Medicaid units of service reported on the OMH-1. The OMH-2 Medicaid Units of Service by Program and Site is only completed for OMH providers that file a full CFR and have program sites that are eligible to bill Medicaid for the services provided. This schedule is set up the same way as the OMH-1, except it has been updated to track units of service separately for Medicaid fee-for-service revenues and Medicaid revenues received as part of Medicaid managed care. Each line has an A and a B for this purpose. This is a continuation of the OMH-2. Depending upon the program selected, only the relevant lines for that program will be available for input. In this example, the provider is operating Clinic Treatment Program 2100. Lines 6A and 6B are white and data can be entered. Everything else is grayed out and non-enterable. This is a continuation of the OMH-2. And this is also a continuation of the OMH-2. Once completed, you can click Next Schedule to move forward, Previous Schedule to go back, or Delete to delete the program from the OMH2 schedule. If you choose to delete a program, a warning message will pop up. Choose OK to delete the program or Cancel to return to the schedule. Schedule OMH3, Client Information. Enter the number of clients served by the program. This may differ from the number of admissions because a person can be admitted more than once. The caseload at the start of the current period should equal the caseload at the end of the prior period. The OMH3 captures the number of persons served by the program and site for the year. This is an example of a program without an ongoing caseload. So the beginning and ending numbers on lines 1 and 4 will be 0. Indicate the same number of persons served on lines 2 and 3. These numbers will indicate how many people were seen and how many left. This is an example of a program with an ongoing caseload. So you would indicate the number of persons on the active caseload as of the beginning of the reporting period on line 1. This figure should match the number reported as persons on roll end of year from the previous CFR reporting period. Indicate the number of persons admitted to the program site during the reporting period on line 2. Indicate the number of persons terminated from active program enrollment during the reporting period on line 3. This should include all persons not seen or contacted within 90 days. Determine the active caseload as of the end of the reporting period on line 4 by adding lines 1 and 2 and subtracting line 3. Schedule OMH4 units of service by payor by program and site must be completed for each OMH clinic treatment program reported on a full CFR. This schedule captures units of service provided by payor and associated revenues for particular sources of payment. The units of service data is used in the safety net payment calculation. Total units of service on Schedule OMH4, line 15, should be similar or equal to OMH1, line 16. This schedule must be completed based on date of service rendered and only for services provided during the reporting period. For the purposes of this schedule, a visit is defined as including all procedures provided to a patient on the same day and is referred to as a threshold visit. When completed, click Next Schedule to continue. OMH changes. The following OMH program codes are no longer reported on the CFR for periods beginning on or after January 1st, 2021. 2010 Private Inpatient Psychiatric Hospital, 3010 Inpatient Psychiatric Unit of a General Hospital. So if these are the only programs that you report, you're one of the lucky ones. CFR1, line 13, the OMH1 line number reference for weighted visits or hours was updated. CFR1, lines 13A and 13B, the OMH2 line number reference for weighted visits or hours was updated. CFR3, line 65, which is the OMH adjusted subtotal, the instructions were updated to remove OMH programs that were deleted. EMH2, line 39, other non-GAAP adjustments, Paycheck Protection Program Loan Forgiveness was added as a predefined line. OMH1, lines 14 and 15, are now used to report two new programs, 1700, which is Supportive Crisis Stabilization Center, and 1710, which is Intensive Crisis Stabilization Center. OMH1, lines 16, 17, and 18 are now Other, Residential, and Total Units of Service. OMH2, lines 14 and 15 are now used to report two new programs, mentioned previously, 1700 and 1710. OMH2, lines 16, 17, and 18 are now Other, Residential, and Total Units of Service. OMH4, line 8, was updated to include the Essential Plan. These are Appendix F changes. The listed program codes were added to Appendix F, 0780, 1700, 1710, and 1720. The listed program codes were deleted from Appendix F, 0920, 1810, 1910, 2010, 3010, 6910, and 4040. The listed program codes were revised in Appendix F, 0680, 2680, 2730, 2980, 4650, 4690, and 4710. Also on that list that were revised, 4720, 4920, 5070, and 8810. MHPD. OMH providers should continue to use the Mental Health Provider Data Exchange, or MHPD, to submit corrections, openings, and closures of programs. The programs and sites reported on your CFR should match our concerts database. An attachment A is automatically generated and mailed with each desk review letter. It compares the programs listed in our concerts database versus what you reported on your CFR. Any discrepancies must be resolved. Various legislation has provided additional monies to assist with COVID relief that include the Community Mental Health Services Block Grant and the Federal Medical Assistance Percentage, or FMAP, share of funds for Medicaid programs. Supplemental funding opportunities are available to eligible providers. Assist with recruitment and retention incentives, educational expenses, career development, and support. They require quarterly reporting to OMH in addition to the CFR. The Supplemental Block Grant and FMAP funding website is a valuable resource linking providers to many additional funding opportunities and instructions regarding these grants. View these sections for specific instructions. DOH highlights supplementals and changes. DOH providers are required to complete a full CFR submission that includes the schedules listed.
Lisa, I don't hear you. I'm sorry if it's just me, but is anyone else having that issue? All right, so Lisa, I think there's some communication issues. I'm going to pass it to Michelle as a backup. Michelle, is that okay?
That would be fine.
I'm not sure what happened to Lisa, and I apologize everyone for the inconvenience.
All right, so the following are the DOH highlights. On the CFR, the IOS clinic is reported on program code 2100 for OMH, 3520 for OASAS, and 1580 for Department of Health. An allocation is made between OMH, OASAS, and DOH that operate that IOS clinic. Programs are required to maintain support demonstrating that they have used a reasonable method of allocating costs. This is detailed in section 66, appendix GG of the CFR manual. Next, we'll go over OCFS highlights, supplementals, and changes. OCFS providers are required to complete a full CFR submission, and they include the following schedules. Note that OCFS providers do not complete claiming schedules. A full submission includes Schedule CFR 1, Schedule CFR 2, 2A, 3, 4, 4A, CFR 5, CFR 6, the reconciliation schedule as applicable, and the following certifications must be signed: Schedule CFR I, CFR II or II-A, CFR IV, and the COVID-19 informational schedule must be completed. The OCF programs are listed in Appendix II. The unit service of measurement is detailed in the programs in that appendix. The following position title code was added to Appendix R of the CFR manual. Position title code 327, Licensed Mental Health Counselor. The site code for OCFS for a program is determined by using the first 4 digits of your agency code and the first 3 digits of the program code. And again, the units of service measurement is located in Appendix II for each OCFS program. Okay, and here is your next presenter.
Thank you, Michelle. Can you pass me the... This is Paul Sutton from the Office of Addiction Services and Supports, and I'll be going through some of the OASAS highlights and changes. Our office is located at 1450 Western Ave in Albany. Now, OASAS has some penalties for late filers. That includes we could impose some fines or withhold your state aid, if necessary. So please make sure you submit all your CFRs on time. This is the contact information for the various departments. If you have budget questions, you'll contact the budget department. If you have questions about your your payments, and you'll reach out to the claims department and so forth. A CFR submission is not complete without the submission of the required certification schedules and audited or reviewed financial statements. The preferred method of signature page financial statement submission is electronic filing to the CFRS web. However, besides electronic filing, OASAS will continue to accept emailed PDF files, the CFR-I, IIIA, III, IV, attestation statement, financial statements, and parent agency allocation. If you do email those, they should be named with the following naming convention. Now, copies of all required certification schedules and attestation statements submitted by email must be as PDF files, and you must hold on to your original signatures for the required retention period, and must be able to make those available upon request to OASAS or any other stakeholder. Now, the DCN number on your emailed PDF certifications must match the DCN number of the uploaded CFR files and the original signature copies that you're keeping. In order for your certifications to satisfy submission requirements, the following issues should be avoided: partial or blurred images. If we can't read it or can't see it, we can't accept it and we'll ask you to resubmit. And finally, a new round of signatures needs to be submitted for each new DCN number uploaded. And subsequent to a new CFR-II being received, OASAS will accept an attestation statement from your executive director reporting minor changes in lieu of the additional II from your accountant. OASAS providers are responsible for updating their own contact information in the provider directory system, which is located at the link listed below. At time of any staff changes, contact names, email addresses, and phone numbers should be updated. This will ensure that providers and programs receive important communications from OASAS, as well as providing current names and phone numbers so that we can reach out to you. In 2021, OASAS received 2 supplemental awards under the Substance Abuse Prevention and Treatment, or SAP, block grant through CRF and ARPA, collectively referred to as FFY21 SAP Supplemental Grant Awards. Providers are required to report this as following. On the core schedules, the expenses for direct costs should be reported on the CFR-1 under the appropriate program, and on the CFR-3 for administrative costs. The revenues should be reported on the CFR-1 line 79 and the DMH-1 line 25 under federal grants. On your claiming schedules, the expenses should be reported in the respective category, and the revenues on the DMH-2 line 24 listed as SAP supplemental. Because the contract period for the SAP supplemental grant funds does not coincide with the standard funding period, you will report the expenses and uses of the funds on the claiming schedules or the reporting period in which they occur. As a result, you may report expenses and revenues with the SAP grant funds in more than one reporting period. State Opioid Response, or SOAR, is a federal grant, and we expect it to be reported as such. SOAR is awarded by the Department of Health and Human Services, which is an available line in the detail box under the CFR-1 line 79 federal grants. The following OASAS programs have had program titles, descriptions, and their units of service modified. Programs 4650, 4690, 4710, and 4720. The following OASAS-only programs were recently added to CFRS Web and will be effective upon the dates listed below. 4081 non-medical transportation, 4082 capital improvements, 4083 outreach services, and 4084 jail-based services. In order to ensure accuracy, the Fiscal Audit and Review Unit, or FARU, will perform on-site visits, and the CFR Review Unit will perform desk reviews of the CFR submissions. Any areas that need additional explanation or revision will be detailed in a CFR review and emailed to the provider. Failure to respond to review may lead to withholding of funding or revocation of your certificate. Accurate and complete CFR data for OASAS programs is critically important for OASAS fiscal policy development and analysis. Cost report data is also requested and used by other New York State agencies and the federal government for a variety of different purposes. Following are some examples of items that are covered in our reviews. Are all documentation such as signature pages and financial statements submitted on time? Are all active programs reported? Have the units of service been reported accurately on CFR-1, line 13, and do they reflect the MSDS reports? Does your CFR-2 and 2A match your financials? Are all non-allowable expenses reported on the CFR-1, line 40, or the CFR-3, line 17, adjusted out accordingly? Is the CFR-5 and 6 completed? Once the core reports are complete, and if any of your programs are funded, then from the bottom of the DMH1 screen, select DMH1 to DMH2 transfer in order to begin the creation of the claiming schedules. After transferring the data, you can make manual adjustments to the DMH2 if required. We would not expect adjustments to be made in the reporting for the personal services, fringe benefits, and OTPS expense categories unless there is also a change in the method of counting. However, adjustments are likely for the remaining categories, vacation leave accruals. CFR SWEB will not transfer the VLA from the core as is considered non-reimbursable, so will just automatically be adjusted out. Equipment and property. The following adjustments are allowed: an addition of an expensed item in the period it was purchased, and the subtraction of any non-reimbursable expenses such as depreciation, interest, real estate taxes, and mortgage expenses, which were reported on the CFR-1, lines 40 through 60. The CFR SWEB has been updated to include drop-down detail boxes in order to individually list the adjustments from the core. Choose either a predefined line or select Add a Line. For each row of data, select either addition or subtraction to individually list the addition of a fully expensed item or the subtraction of a non-reimbursable item. The net amount of these program expenses will transfer to the respective DMH2 line 9 or line 10. For a full list of non-reimbursable expenses, refer to section 21.3 of the CFR manual. OASAS does not allow service providers to budget for or claim depreciation and/or interest expense for state aid reimbursement. OASAS does require a provider to expense fully all equipment and property purchases during the reporting period. This is a screenshot of the DMH2 line 9 for equipment. The CFR SWEB will include the following predefined entries: depreciation vehicle, depreciation equipment, interest vehicle. You can also add your own. This is a shot of the predefined lines for line 10, property expenses. The CFR SWEB includes the following predefined entries: building depreciation, building land improvement depreciation, mortgage capital improvement interest, mortgage expenses, real estate taxes, and interest on capital indebtedness. Administrative expenses reported in the CFR-3 must be prorated to determine the OASAS portion to be adjusted out of the claim on the DMH2 line 12. The prorated share is derived for each program by first dividing the program's total operating cost from the CFR1 line 64 by the total agency operating expense on the CFR1 line 53. Then you would multiply the total of the non-reimbursable costs reported on the CFR3 by the percentage calculated in step 1. Finally, report this amount on the DMH2 line 12 for the specific program. The DMH2 line 12 is used to report other than property and equipment non-reimbursable expenses, as well as the prorated percentage of non-reimbursables from the CFR3 agency administration expenses. Early retirement incentive payments and severance pay. These expenses should be reported fully on the core reports and claiming schedules, then adjusted out of the claim of the DMH2 line 12 as non-reimbursable. Any expense considered non-reimbursable for a provider would also be considered non-reimbursable for a related party. Therefore, any depreciation expense or mortgage interest expense noted on the CFR 5, Section C, which was used to validate the expense in Section B, may need to be adjusted out either fully or partially based on the source of the expense. Here's a shot of the CFR 5. Note that the amounts from the CFR 5, Section C, columns 4, 5, and possibly 8 may need to be adjusted out as non-reimbursable for claiming purposes. Once we've sent you our review letter and review questions, a response is required from you. Generally, we give you 30 days or less, to make the changes and respond. If you agree with our findings, the CFR should be revised and validated. Once you obtain a new DCN number and submit it as a PDF format, sending it back to us in an email along with your written response. Once we have confirmed the corrections were made, you'll be asked to upload the CFR and submit the required certification pages. If you do not agree with our findings, please provide additional explanation along with supporting documentation and clarification of your position. And that concludes the OASAS changes. I will now pass this off to our next speaker.
Good morning. This is Alpa Amin from OPWDD. I will begin OPWDD specific highlights, supplementals, and changes sections. Reporting units of services. For program code 231, supervised IRA, you should report units of service corresponding to all billed therapeutic.
Alpha, I'm gonna stop yet. The slides haven't gone forward.
Oh. So my page down button doesn't work.
There we go. All right, now.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. For a program code 231, supervised IRA, you should report units of service corresponding to all billed therapeutic leave days and retainer days on CFR 1, line 13A. Site-specific reporting is required for this program type. In units of service, you should include all actual units served, plus all therapeutic leave days that were billed, plus all retainer days that were billed at the 0 rate. For respite programs 311 and 312, program type report is required. Billable unit should be reported. For example, 1 quarter hour equals 1 unit of service. Any per diem billing should be reported as 96 units of service. Okay. OPW program codes listed here require site-specific reporting. Refer to Appendix FF of Manual for detailed allocation methodologies related to OPWDD specific programs. These methodologies should be applied after the methodologies detailed in Appendix J have been applied to allocate costs between shared programs. OPWDD penalty. If the CFR, the financial statements, and the certification pages are not uploaded or received in Albany by due date, providers are subject to financial penalty of 2% of Medicaid billings until the first of the month following compliance. And if all documents are not received by February 1, 2022, a 50% penalty for waiver programs will be effective on August 1, 2023. OPWDD penalties are not refunded after provider come into compliance. If the provider is not into compliance, OPWDD may ask the provider to voluntarily surrender program operating certificate. Residential reserve for replacement programs. The applicable residential reserve for replacement programs 294, 297, and 298 must be added to the CFR if funding for any of the RRR programs has been used during the reporting period. If the expenses in these program codes are not reported properly, it could affect funds. A new FAQ for OPWDD Workforce Stabilization Initiative is added. Any revenue for the Workforce Stabilization Initiative is to be reported on CFR 1, line 94. The new predefined line labeled ARPA mirror ARPA funding should be used. WSI personal service costs reported on CFR 1, line 16 and contracted service reported on CFR 1, line 35 must be reported on CFR 1, line 68F. Fringe benefit costs reported on CFR 1, line 18 must be reported on CFR 1, line 68G. OPWDD programs that require DMH2 and DMH3 should not include revenue or expenses related to the WSI. The difference in the expenses from DMH1 to the claiming schedule should be shown as expense variance. The provider should enter workforce stabilization payments on the explanation of variance line. Line 68F and G are a newly established line only for OPWDD information purpose. CFR 1, line 68A through 68G. This is a screenshot of CFR 1, line 68A to 68G. CFR 1, line 68A and B and line 68D through 68G are OPWDD only information lines. Data for these lines are only required for specific OPWDD programs. 68F and G are not available to view yet, but will be placed below 68E. If you have to or from transportation expenses for the day treatment, day have, or pre-work program, those expenses are to be reported in program code 0670 and or 0880 to receive funding in your Medicaid rate. Service providers who operate their own transportation, the expenses should be reported under program code 0670. Service providers that subcontract for any transportation to or from services, the expenses should be reported under program code 0880. Those transportation expenses are then allocated back to the day treatment, day have, and or pre-work program sites on CFR 1, line 68B. Failure to report could result in a significant rate cut. Transportation expenses other than to or from home and site should be reported on CFR 1, line 68A. Allocation method may include the number of the trips or individual transported. The basis for this allocation must be reasonable and documented. CFR 1 line 68D and 68E. On line 68D, report the amount directly associated with the program administration property that is reported on CFR 1 line 63. On line 68E, when people with disability residing in an ICF IID and attend a day habilitation or pre-vocational service program operated by the ICF IID provider or another entity, the associated value of the service, which is the amount that the service provider has billed for the service provided, is to be reported on this line. For line 68E, agency will have to get some of this information from the other agency that performs ICF IID programs and bills Medicaid for the services. CFR 1 line 68F and G. Line 68F, total personal services reported on CFR 1 line 16 and contracted service reported on CFR 1 line 35 that are related to OPWDD's Workforce Stabilization Initiative are reported on line 68F. Fringe benefits reported on CFR 1 line 18 that are related to OPWDD's Workforce Stabilization Initiatives are reported on line 68G. Expenses related to COVID service payments, vaccination incentive payments, longevity payments, retention payments are reported on this line. If you operate an ICF and due to the COVID, you started providing day service for those ICF residents using your own staff, then you will report this under program 0093 in-home service for individuals residing in an ICF. In some cases, you may not have been notified of your ability to bill for these services until 2022. If the services were provided prior to July 1, 2021, the program should be reported in the 2021 CFR. It should not be reported on the 2022 fiscal CFR. For many, the only expenses for 0093 will be the staff personal services and the benefits, which will have to be reallocated from other programs. OPWDD 1 Schedule of Service ICF IID only. The OPWDD 1 schedule is used to report services and supplies provided within the ICF IID program code 0090 and 1090. A separate schedule must be completed for each ICF IID site with the 7-digit operating certificate number used as the site code. If medical supplies is marked with an X in column 2 or 3, OPWDD 2 schedule must be completed for that ICF IID site. OPWDD 2 ICF IID medical supplies. The OPWDD 2 schedule is used to report medical supplies that are included in CFR. Complete OPWDD 2 schedule only if column 2 or 3 was selected on line 6, other medical supply on schedule OPWDD 1. A separate schedule must be completed for each certified site. OPWDD 5 Capital Schedule. The OPWDD 5 schedule is used to detail property expenses that have been reported on Schedule CFR 1 for the programs listed here on this slide. The Department of Health will post the reimbursement information for column 1 at the OPA site. If some of your day hab or pre-walk expenses have been allocated to program codes 0092, 0094, 0095, or to CFR 2 column 9, leave all property expenses in 204, 205, and 227. OPWDD 5 requires site-specific reporting. Refer to Section 30 of the manual for more information regarding completion of Schedule OPWDD 5. This is the screenshot of Schedule OPWDD 5. If the OPA site lists no property reimbursement for a program, then enter a 0 in both column 1 and column 2 on line 1. Completion of the OPWDD file is necessary to validate the submission. If there are no property payments to report in column 1, then column 2 should be blank. The expenses listed in column 2 need not equal the expense listed on the line cited in column 3. Only that portion of the expenses related to the property payment is to be reported. Note that there is a new predefined entry to cover prior period property adjustments. OPWDD changes. The name of the program code 0257 has been changed to HCBS Community Rehabilitation Residential Services. And finally, new funding source code 590 OPWDD COLA for OPWDD only has been added. This concludes my section. I will transfer now to next speaker.
Education Department. And I am here, I'm going to go through the next set of slides for SED highlights, supplementals, and changes. And in this presentation part, I will be touching upon what the contents of the rate setting unit's website, late submissions, and SED supplemental schedules, SED-1 and SED-4. So on this first slide is a link to the rate setting unit website. And on this website, you'll be able to access CFR manuals, reimbursable cost manual. You'll also get the current year's methodology and past previous years. You also will be able to get ability to register or links to register for the for notifications for the rate setting unit's tuition rate process, and also a link to register for SEDFIN website. This is a website software that we calculate the rates, and there are tuition rate notifications on there. This next slide is about our late submission penalty. For SED providers, that the interest expense on working capital loans for late filers require financial information will be reimbursed on a prorated basis if submitted within 90 days. If it's submitted after the 90 days, then you won't be reimbursed at all for the interest expense. And also keep note that if you are late, have a late submission in 2021 CFR, it won't affect it until 2022-23 CFR. On this next section, we're going to go over the SED supplemental schedules, SED-1 and SED-4. SED-1 is basically just program and enrollment data, and this is where you would key in all the data for your student enrollment. So what SED-1 is collects the full-time equivalent student enrollment. The reports total FGs by funding source on SED-1 lines 100 through 107, and reports the total days the program operated on SED-1 line 109. And session days. So session days are usually 30 for summer and 180 for the school year, but sometimes they can vary, especially for the school year. So the next program we are going to talk about SED-1 is SED programs. Now, SED programs, they have two lines on SED-1, line 111, which is the mandated SED units provided, and 1115 is, excuse me, sorry. 1115 is where you report the actual units provided per the IEP. And these are also calculated using the care, session days, making the care days. Enrollment is reported in full-time equivalent, and students that are counted as full-time equivalent 1 FTE, unless they are admitted to a program later than the beginning or discharged earlier, and then you would prorate the FTE. FTE is calculated based upon weeks enrolled divided by the total weeks in the program. All this can be referenced in the CFR manual, section 32, page 32A.2. Student FTE, if a program is operated less than 5 hours a day, the FTE are prorated, so that you would, let's say the program is run 3 hours out of the 5, you prorate that FTE by 60%. Again, you would use the care days, and you would use them to calculate the per day tuition rate is used in the rate setting methodology. So you can reference the methodology back at the rate setting unit website. Care days are established by multiplying the student's FTE times the session days in the school year. And that you would get, let's say, either the 180 or the 30, and you would divide them, and you would get the total care days. And all this stuff can be referenced in the CFR manual in that section that I told you, and you can find examples of student enrollment FTE calculations there. When reporting student enrollment FTEs for students with one-to-one aides, include them in the classroom student FTE in both the 9230 and the program student enrolled in, the program that the students enrolled. SED-1, line 201 to 903 details the total number of classrooms operated and student FTEs enrolled by the program for each SCD approved classroom ratio. They should always agree, and always agree to the program approval letter that you get from your program regional associate. The ratio is the amount of students, teachers, and aides. Sorry about that. This next slide is a snapshot of the CFR SED-1 reporting. So this is where you will report the data. Next section is supplemental schedules SED-4. SED-4 is broken up into 3 sections: capacity, need, and productivity. SED-4 is required for all rate-based programs except for the CIP programs. CIP programs are from 9135 to 9149. SED-4 not required for only the special education program at service providers is a special education itinerant teacher program. Again, the 9135 to 9149. The schedules RS2 does not need to be sent to SED. Please retain a copy for of this schedule for your files. An Excel version of the RS2 schedule is available on the Rate Setting Unit website at the link listed under the manuals and forms. And here is a snapshot of the form that you would use to submit. RS2 information. Data from the RS2 feeds into the SED4. These forms are used to determine the capacity, need, and productivity of the related services for school-age and preschool special education programs. The instructions for RS2 can be found on the RSU website via this link. You can complete the RS2 for each related service type. And this goes down through the calculation. Schedule RS2 column 6 is a total therapy type. RS2 schedule for new columns, column number 13, annual IEP mandated. Related service sessions not provided due to telepractice accessibility issues. Report sessions not provided due to the accessibility issues related to delivery service via telepractice. This concludes my portion of the presentation. I'm going to pass this on to the next presenter.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. This is Richard from OMH CFR unit. Today I'm going to talk about the COVID-19 schedule. So the COVID-19 schedule is a supplemental schedule designed to help provide information to CFR reporting agencies on the economic impact COVID-19 has had on providers. This independent schedule is required for all submission types for OMH, OPWDD, OASAS, DOH, and OCFS. For SED providers that submit a CFR, they are required to complete the COVID-19S schedule. The data provided on the schedule does not transfer to any other schedules on the CFR. Instructions for the schedule can be found in Section 33B of the CFR manual. And like the core CFR schedules, the COVID-19 schedule is completed using accrual accounting. While the schedule does not need certification, it should be reviewed for reasonableness. This informational schedule reports increases in program administration and program site expenses and revenues specifically related to COVID-19. Agencies will report expenses and revenues on the appropriate lines which were incurred during the reporting period. For OPWDD, program type reporting only is required for the schedule. The COVID-19 schedule is divided into 3 sections: general information, program site data, and personal services, each within their own tab on CFR's web. Here is the general information section. This requires responses to questions regarding the Paycheck Protection Program, PPP, along with other types of revenue and gains on the extinguishment of debts relating to COVID-19. The first question asks if you've received first and second draws from PPP. If your answer is no, CFRS Web will advance you to question number 3. However, if the answer is yes, then you'll be prompted to enter your responses into 1B, which is the total amount of PPP loan your agency received, and 1C, the date your agency received the loans. In 2A, you will be asked if the loans were forgiven, and if so, you'll enter the date they were forgiven in 2B. In 2C, you'll enter the amount of the loans that were forgiven. And question 3 reports on the total revenue and gains on the extinguishment of debt attributable to COVID-19 funding, which includes grants, loan forgiveness, contributions, donations, and/or tax credits. Some items included in total revenues and gains include COVID-19 grants from federal or state agencies, counties, or private foundations, loans that were forgiven and recorded as revenue or gains on extinguishment of debt, tax credits, or donations. After completion of the general information section, the second tab is where the program site data is entered. Here, you'll select the state agency, the program, and site that expenses and revenues will be entered for. Expenses reported within the expense section must be related to COVID-19. These expenses are over and above normal agency expenses for things such as PPP, other than ordinary equipment, staffing in excess of normal needs, cleaning services, temporary housing for COVID-positive residents or staff, telecommunications, interest on debt, and additional storage needs. FEMA costs for emergency medical services include emergency services and operation centers, meals and supplies for emergency workers, medical supplies, testing and vaccination, and training. Please visit the Program and Policy Guide at the FEMA website provided for more information. The revenue section is next. COVID-19 funding recorded as revenue will be reported here. There are many sources of revenue, such as CARES Act loans, which have been forgiven and recorded as revenue or gains on extinguishment of debt, possible program rate changes related to COVID. Other forms of revenue include grants, which can be governmental, public, or from private foundations, donations, and any tax credits that were recorded as revenue. Federal grants will be reported on line 64. Here you'll find many predefined entries available to choose from: PPP, FEMA, and various governmental agencies are some of the examples shown here. The third tab is the Personal Services section, which is very similar to the CFR-4. Personal services expenses are reported that were incurred and responded to COVID-19. This schedule is completed in the same manner that the CFR-4 is. You'll select the title codes for each program site, enter their standard work week, hours paid, and the amount paid. All total personal service expenses entered will transfer to line 1 of the program site data section from the second tab. If you need further instructions on how to complete this, see section 16.0 of the CFR manual, which shows you how to complete the CFR-4. And this concludes the COVID-19 schedule section, and I'll turn it over to the next presenter.
Good morning. I'm Nellie Gutos from the New York State Education Department, and I will be presenting on the COVID-19S, and I want to thank Richard for going ahead of me because many things are very similar, so he made my job easier. The COVID-19S is required for all CFR submissions from SED providers, and it is completed independently from other CFR schedules and the COVID-19 schedule. The COVID-19 S schedule is used to report the net changes in program administration and program expenses. That's the difference between the COVID-19 and the COVID-19 S. We are looking, SED is looking for the net changes. We can have negative, expenses went down, and we can have positive, the expenses went up. Anything that's related to COVID-19, the information is scheduled should be net changes, like I said, by the provider. The COVID-19 S is required for all CFRs from SED providers, and it is independent from other CFR schedules and independent from the COVID-19 schedule. Like I said, it reports the net change in program administration and program site expenses, and it's totally an informational schedule. It should be reviewed for accuracy, but it's not one of the certified schedules. Here is the general information slide. Richard sort of went over the same sort of questions, but basically it asks you when you received any PP loans and if they were forgiven, and if so, what amount was it given, and the dates. You can read these questions as you're coming up to it, and it should be self-explanatory. And this goes over the questions. If you receive a certain response, go to the next level. I don't need to read this back to you. The personal services schedule, the program site administration is basically you're doing a CFR 4 for personal services and a CFR 4A, and the data from that on the COVID-19 S flows into the totals of this, what would be the CFR 1 on the COVID-19 S, or the total site expenses. You can enter negative numbers on this. Here is an example of the COVID-19 S, where you can see the expenses flowing. This is equivalent to the CFR 1. The reason why SED is looking for negative ups and downs, because we're looking to see the impact on the tuition rate, that schools are not adversely impacted just because they received offsetting revenues or their expenses were down for a year, and they normally would have to incur those expenses to operate their program. Okay. So here is another example of the expense side of the COVID-19 S, where they're entering the different titles of the positions that were affected. And here is a couple examples of expenses that could go up and down. If there were food expenses for your students and everybody was working remotely, or the school, you didn't incur the expense for the school lunches for the students, or snacks, so that would be a negative. But then you may have had to purchase some PPP equipment that was above and beyond what you normally would be spending money on, and then you would have a positive. So you could have a negative for not having money for snacks, and a positive because you had to incur more PPP money expenses, PPE expenses. Here is an example of the other than personal services section of the COVID-19 S. And this continues further lines of the equipment provider and property provider paid section of the COVID-19S. With revenues, you report only the net change in revenue and gains on the extinguishment of debt recorded in the period that is related to the COVID-19. For the following lines, line 53, participant fees, and line 59, other third parties, you should only report the revenue received after netting any negotiated contractual adjustments. So you could have had an agreement that you were going to get paid $100, but then it was decided it would be only $75. You would be reporting the $75. And this gives an example of it. The published fee was $105, but you agreed on $75, so you would record the revenue for the $75. Here's the CFR Web COVID-19S revenue section. And this concludes my portion of the presentation, and I will hand the baton to the next individual.
Hi, folks. This is Paul Green from the Office of Addiction Services and Supports. Thank you very much for attending today. We appreciate your participation, and we hope everything is educational for you. The SUPP-1 schedule collects data for use in the upper payment limit UPL calculations. The UPL is a federal limit placed on fee-for-service reimbursement of Medicaid providers. Okay. Hospitals and federally qualified health centers are exempt from completing the SUPP-1. Okay. However, for the three agencies, OASAS, OMH, and OPWDD, any providers that operate the programs listed on in this chart are required to complete the SUPP-1. And providers who fail to submit CFRs or submit inaccurate or incomplete information may lose any supplemental UPL payments they would otherwise be entitled to. This is a screenshot of how to complete the SUPP-1. Again, it starts out with the initial question: is your provider agency a hospital or federally qualified health center? If the answer is no, then you have to complete it. If the answer is yes, then you are done and you can move on. So in this case, the answer was no. So then you have to put in your state agency, the program, and the site. So the software knows that you are operating program 3520. So the software knows that you have to complete the SUPP-1. So it will be looking for completion, and if you do not, it will flag you on final validations. So the MMIS number automatically populates. So you have to fill in columns 1, 2, and 4 in the bottom section. Column 3 is grayed out, which means it's calculated automatically. So for this program, for Medicaid fee-for-service, you would put in the total visits and the gross revenues and the net revenues, and the adjustments would be calculated. You do the same for managed care. Then row 3 is a total of the 2 rows above it. Then you would put in all other, and then the total for the document. Units of service, total visits equals units of service. We would expect this total visits to equal what you're reporting on the CFR-1 line 13. Okay. We use the same definition of a threshold visit. So a threshold visit is report the number of total threshold visits by the payer. For purpose of the schedule, a visit is defined as including all services provided to a patient on the same day. So that's where we do see some discrepancies. Sometimes people think that a unit of service or a visit includes procedures, how many procedures occur. But that's not the case. So if a provider comes in the morning and then comes back in the afternoon for a different procedure, it's still only one provider per one day. It's only one unit of service, okay? I'm sorry, I said the word provider, I meant client. So a qualifying threshold visit is one where the registered clinic patient has an encounter with a qualified licensed or credentialed practitioner, such as a physician, nurse practitioner, registered physician, and such. Okay. For OASAS opioid treatment programs billed under ambulatory patient groups, such as rate codes 1564 and 67, they are claimed weekly. Okay, so they bill on a weekly basis, and they may get paid on a weekly basis. However, each day of service on a weekly claim should be counted as a Medicaid visit, and the facilities billed Medicaid under APG should report the number of daily visits in the total visits column. So, again, even though you're billing weekly, it's still a daily visit, and that would be a threshold visit. The only thing that is handled differently are OASAS, OTP, Medicaid weekly bundle rates. And this, you would bill for a week, and it would only be considered one unit of service. The last thing to note on that is telepractice, telepsychiatry, and telehealth services are all counted as threshold visits. So that's the end of the SUPP-1, and the remainder of this presentation is directed towards agencies that submit a claiming document, which is the DMH-2 and DMH-3. If your agency does not, then you may leave at this time. Agencies that file a claiming document include those receiving state aid or local aid in the form of net deficit funding. Agencies that do not file a claiming document include OASAS, OMH, OPWDD providers that do not receive any state aid for any programs, and SED, DOH, and OCFS providers. Okay. So if you are not receiving state aid and you are leaving at this point, the host would appreciate if you would still fill out the survey as you leave, because that information is important to us for tracking purposes. So please fill out the survey as you leave. Those that are not sure whether they complete a claiming document or not, maybe new to the agency, just stick around. It's only another 20 minutes, and it's very informative. So moving along. Budget modifications. If you haven't done so already, compare your projected expenses and revenues to your approved budget now. If it appears a modification to your approved budget is required, consult the funding New York State agencies for guidance. So we're always just saying that to get ahead of it, consult before the period is over. Emily talked about this yesterday in the DMH-1, which is the end of the core schedules. The last slide on the core schedules is the DMH-1. So you feel that you've done a good job, you've completed the core schedules, and now it's time to do the claiming schedules. At the bottom of the DMH-1 is a yellow tab, DMH-1 to DMH-2 transfer. We suggest you click on that, and it will transfer all the information from the core to the claim. You don't have to do it that way. There is an alternative way of inputting the information directly on the claim. But if you do transfer it, it's a way to make sure that you don't miss anything. We've already touched on this. You can do it right through the utilities, the menu section, the utilities. You can go to the DMH1 to DMH2 transfer. But this is the screen that you will see when you click that button, and it will show you your 5 programs that you operate. Now, you can select all of them, or you can select individual ones. In this case, I've selected 3 of them, and I've used the allocation method of percentage, which is what we recommend, okay? And now you pick the county. The county is New York. The percentage is 100, and those three programs, when I click this transfer programs, they will all go over to a DMH2 for New York City, and it will be what you will work on to complete. One thing to notice over here is data already existed in DMH2, so there's already data there. When you click this button, it will be overridden, okay? If, for some reason, I wanted to send 50% of the expenses and the revenues to the Bronx and 50% to New York, I can use the Add a County button down at the bottom and select the 50% and do so. If I decide not to do this, if I change my mind, I can use the trash can to delete, and then I can use the change the percentage to 100. The existing data in the DMH2 will be replaced. Do you want to continue? You select yes. And now it says that the transfer of the data is complete. However, some lines will need additional detail, okay? The lines are 17A, Medicaid fee for service. The total transferred over, the total 449,918 is on the line. However, the drop-down box has not been completed, okay? So we do not have the ability to transfer over the drop-down detail. In order to make the drop-down detail box match the line, you'll have to go into it and enter base Medicaid 449,918, and then close it, and it'll automatically save, okay? If for some reason you forget to do this, when you try to run full calculations and validate submissions, it will remind you it needs to be done. So again, the totals transfer over, but the drop-down detail does not. Okay. When you transfer over, the first thing you have to do is you have to decide whether it's well, you have to pick the state agency, the county, and the program. And then you have to decide whether it's a direct contract or a local contract. Direct contract is funding directly between the state and the provider, and local contractor is funding directly between the local government unit and the provider. Direct contract usually starts with a C0, and a local contract can be almost anything. Some of the information will transfer automatically. Some of the information will have to be input. So one of the things you'll have to do is you'll have to select the accounting method: accrual, modified, or cash. That's from the drop-down arrow over here, and then you'll put in the state contract number. Personal services have transferred over. Fringe benefits have transferred over. Other than personal services transferred over. Vacation leave accruals have not, and that is for an OASAS-only situation. OASAS-funded service providers cannot report vacation leave accruals for state aid reimbursement. Therefore, it will not automatically transfer over. For the other agencies, it probably would. So you can know that it is automatically solving that issue. Okay. We would not expect these numbers on personal service, fringe benefits, and OTPS to change, especially if you're still using the accrual method of accounting. If for some reason you change to a modified accrual or cash basis of accounting, then possibly these numbers would change, probably these numbers would change, but we're not expecting them to change, to be honest with you. The things that we are expecting to change are the equipment and the property, okay? The core reports was all about fiscal analysis from year to year, comparing year to year, and we request you to use depreciation so that your numbers don't change drastically from year to year. So if you had purchased a $30,000 piece of equipment, you would depreciate it, and it would only be $3,000 a year, and there wouldn't be any drastic change from year to year. However, when it comes to the claims is all about settling up your expenses incurred versus the money that was given to you. So you're going to want the full $30,000 for that piece of equipment. So in the equipment line, you're going to go into the drop-down box, and you're going to enter add a $30,000 piece of equipment, okay? So that the equipment line will increase by $30,000 because you're going to want to get paid for that full amount. You may also have to subtract the depreciation amount that transferred over from the core schedule because you don't want a double bill. So OASAS has these drop-down boxes, and I don't believe the other agencies do. So in that case, you're just going to do the mathematics yourself and input that number. So those numbers those lines are adjustable, and you can put those in. But that's what you're going to do for equipment, and that's what you're going to do for property. If for some reason you were given approval to put in a new parking lot and you incurred a $40,000 expense for a new parking lot, you're going to want to expense the full $40,000. So you're going to add $40,000 of a parking lot expense, and you're going to subtract the amount of depreciation that carried over. Okay? Agency administration is the next thing that carried over, and we really don't expect that to adjust very much at all either. There are some reasons why it would adjust a little bit. You may have to speak with the agency specifically about it. However, this was the amount that was calculated by ratio value, and we feel it's our fair share of agency admin that we're willing to pay. Okay. The biggest argument I get is somebody saying, yes, but my budget, which was approved, showed $5,000 of agency admin expense, and you're now only allowing me to show $3,900 of agency admin expense. Well, you got to understand your budget was an estimate. It was not the actual. And we approved it based on what you said it was going to be. So understand that this is considered the actual agency admin, and this is what we feel is our fair share. If you have arguments or questions or concerns with this, you should speak with your agency directly, okay? The second tab here is the revenues, and it shows the different sources of revenues that you can be reporting. This is a continuation of revenues, and this shows net deficit funding, which is also state and LGU funding only, $150,000, okay? Total gross revenues is $150,000. This is determining net operating cost. Okay, net operating cost, NOC, is your total expenses less all revenues received except for state aid funding. Okay, so in this case, under a non-GAAP adjustment, that $150,000 of state aid funding has been removed, taken out of the equation. So net operating costs was your total expenses, which were $154,000, less all other revenue, which you did not receive any. Therefore, your net operating cost is $154,000. Okay. Net operating cost is total expenses less other revenues besides state aid. On the next tab, deficit funding, we asked you to put in the amount of state aid. Okay. In this case, we're going to put in $150,000, okay? And then you have to fill out the rest of it. And line 49, total deficit funding, must equal line 43 from the tab before, net operating cost, okay? So the fill line is the 48, non-funded. So you wanted to get to 154,084, you had $150,000 of state aid, so you'd put in the 4,084. Now, a couple things to think about here, and they're in your speaker notes. For OASAS, on line 44, they want you to report the lower of the contract amount or line 43, net operating cost, okay? Because by doing that, you will end up with a 0 under line 48 for non-funded, okay? Other agencies, such as OMH, would allow line 48 to be, this is a surplus or deficit of funding over expenses, okay? So OMH allows surplus or deficit of funding over expenses on line 48. OPWDD indicate the amount of all other funding used to support the net operating cost, which does not fall into lines 44 through 47 above. So there's different ways of completing this per agency. They are in the notes in the handout, and if you need additional assistance, then contact the agency specifically, okay? Finally, the last tab is the expense variance tab. So what you're doing here is you're explaining any of the differences from the DMH1 to the DMH2. So personal services, no explanation necessary because no difference. But this one, there is an explanation necessary because of vacation leave accruals is not being reported. So you would just write here, one sentence, doesn't have to be a paragraph, vacation leave accruals adjusted out. Okay. Fringe benefits and OTPS, no problem. Equipment, non-reimbursable depreciation expense adjusted out. So there was $10,000 of depreciation that was adjusted out. The next one is $1,500 of adjustment, but there was no explanation. So we flag it with an explanation of variance should not be blank. If the variance is not equal to 0 or blank. So you have to complete that in order to pass validations. Okay. The core reporting versus the claim reporting is two different things. The CFR1 through DMH1 is the core reporting. The DMH2 and the DMH3 is the claim reporting, and they serve different purposes. The CFR manual is the final final guide for core reporting. But when it comes to claims reporting, there is some questions that can be promoted by the counties, the cities, or the claims department. So we have included in our software things that will help to adjust to satisfy the claims department. And an example of that is the Define a DMH Only program. So if for some reason the claims department asks you to take an expense out of a program, this is how you would do it. If you wanted to split one program into two columns, you would click on Define a DMH Only program. It would come down here, you would say select the program and then enter the index code. Once you have done that, it will create a second column on that DMH2, and then you could put in the $50,000 of other expense that you want to include in that column, okay? So I'm not telling you why this is going to happen. I'm just telling you if it happens, there is a way for you to satisfy the county while still keeping only one program on the core reports, okay? Now, finally, if you're going to do this, if you're going to take $50,000 out of one column and move it into another column, you have to remember to remove the $50,000 from the original column, because the two columns together should equal the total amount. If you have any additional questions on defining a DMH only column, feel free to call us directly. If you need to edit a DMH only program, maybe you had one last year and you don't want it this year, you do that from the program site definition screen, okay? You would go to this screen and you would click on the trash can and you would delete that DMH only column, or you could edit it. Okay. In summary, DMH2 is completed on a New York State agency and county-specific basis. The method of accounting must be indicated over each column containing fiscal data and can be reported on a full accrual, modified accrual, or cash basis. Direct or local contracts must be selected and a contract number entered for each reporting period. Direct contracts usually start with a C0. If there is no local contract number, enter the first 7 letters of the county name. If the county name is 7 letters or less, enter the complete county name. Agency administration is distributed between the New York State agencies using ratio value allocation methodology. Within OASAS and OPWDD schedules, the software calculates ratio value must be used. Equipment may be expensed rather than depreciated. Equipment costs of $5,000 or more per unit and having a useful life of 2 or more years must be reported on line 9. Additional details is required in the reporting of revenue on the other lines. Line detail boxes are also provided for the following types of revenue: 17A, Medicaid, federal grants, state grants, and such. When transferring data from the DMH1 to the DMH2, CFRS Web only transfers the line detail box totals. The detail information must be re-entered in the drop-down box on the DMH2. On a side note, state grants are any type of revenue from a state agency other than the CFR state agencies, okay? Maybe social services or something to that effect. And federal grants, that's been getting a lot of activity lately with the COVID. And when you click on federal grants, you'll see a whole list of agencies of where you'd be reporting revenues. DMH2 is not automatically updated. If you make any changes to the data on the CFR1, CFR3, or 4 after transferring data from DMH1 to 2, you must go back and retransfer the data, okay? So in other words, if you submit a CFR and then receive a review email saying that we want you to change something on the CFR1, once you've made that change, you have to understand that that change does not flow automatically to the DMH2. So you'll have to take that into consideration before you validate again and upload again. DMH3 is all about the source of the funding. So we gave you money, and we want you now to tell us which is the source of that funding. Okay. Basically, you pick your state agency, you pick your county, and you pick your program, okay? And then you go down and you pick your funding source. Now, for OASAS, there's only 5 choices, so it's reasonably easy. However, OMH has many more. I believe you're going to find this information on your contract. It should tell you what the funding source is, okay? If it's not there, then you could also look at last year's CFR, but you should probably confirm it with the agency also. Okay. If you go into it, there's an asterisk in the software. Once you click on that, that will pretty much show you which one you used last year. Okay. Over to the right is contract type, direct contract or local. Again, that is what we said before. Direct is with the state and starts with a C0. Local is through a local government unit and can be anything. Whatever you select here has to match what's on the DMH2. Okay. So keep in mind, if it doesn't, you'll get an error message. Some of these other information will already flow over automatically and you won't have to enter it, such as the accounting method and program type and a program name. If you find an error, for some reason when we were typing up the sample, I grabbed Niagara County instead of New York, and it was incorrect. If I had gone and selected another county, if I had selected up here and changed it from New York to Niagara, or vice versa, I would have ended up with 2 counties. And then I would have had trouble passing validations. So before you do that, click on the Change County button at the bottom of the screen. It will come up with the current county is Niagara. You type in a new county or select from the drop-down, update county, and close, and you're done. Okay. So they also have change funding source. You can do that too if you typed in the wrong funding source or if it changed from last year. If you just select a new one, you'll have 2 of them. But here, if you change it, you'll only be left with 1. Okay. If somehow you make a mistake and you have too many funding sources, and you will see that from the utilities menu. You can go to review your funding sources. There's a delete option there, and you can just select it and delete it and answer yes to delete it. So now you're at the DMH3. You have to fill in these blank lines. Number of persons served, that's not for every program, but that is for several programs. Number of units of service, total expenses, and net applied net revenue. Applied net revenue would be the sum of all revenue besides state aid. Okay, so all your Medicaid, your vending machine money, other third-party money, everything that you receive besides state aid. Okay. Now, over to the right is the program totals for county. So you'll notice here you put in 4,400, but over here the program totals, the running total is 4,459. Therefore, there must be another funding source. Okay. And here it is. This is a different funding source, 090S, non-funded, with 59 units of service, and together with the 4,400 from previously equals the 4,459. Okay? So if you find that this number does not match up with this number, then that means that there's another funding source out there. And maybe it's an error, and you may have to go to the utilities to delete it. But this is a running total of everything that you got here. Okay. So that is the 2 funding source codes for that program. Now, this is what you'll get if it does not match up. You'll get this error saying program totals for total adjusted expenses 912,500 must equal to DMH2 913941. Okay. I had somebody call me on this yesterday, and they were saying, I'm not sure what to do. And I said, don't overthink it. It wants you to change the 912500 to 913941. It's as simple as that. Once you've done that, you can probably then double check it against your DMH2. But basically, all this is doing is comparing the DMH3 to your DMH2, and it's telling you that they do not match. Okay. Once you fix these 2 things, the third one will automatically correct. So the DMH3 is actually one of the easier schedules to complete, because if you go in and you type in the number 1 and hit save, well, it will automatically come up with everything that you should do at that point. It will tell you what you should do next. In summary, for OASAS and OMH, the contract number and type indicated for each program on DMH2 will be transferred to the DMH3. Okay. For OPWDD, at least one contract number and type, state or local combination indication for each program on DMH3 must match the information indicated for that program on DMH2. The DMH3 is completed on a near state agency and county specific basis. Funding source codes are found in Appendix N of the CFR manual. Contract numbers must be entered. Contract type must be designated. For each funding source, enter person served per year, units of service, total expenses, applied net revenue, and net operating cost. And then this shows you that the DMH2 line 13 will match the DMH3, and this is a schedule summarizing that. Okay, that is the end of the claiming section. For any additional questions, feel free to call your specific agency. And on that note, I will hand it off to the next presenter.
Thank you, Paul. All right, so we went over the slide yesterday, but we wanted to make sure that it was seen by everyone again. Obviously, there's a lot of new things coming, especially with the CFRS web. You might not retain everything that you learned here, and we might not have covered everything that you wanted to cover. So we did take a lot of time to put together a help function within CFRS web. We believe it'll be a useful tool, especially because CFRS is web. It's going to be new to everyone. So in order to find this function, it's going to be within the mending function that we talked about earlier. But then there's also going to be help icons throughout the schedules that you can click. It's going to be right next to the schedule names, and a PDF will pop up. Some of the items that are on the user guide, sections are getting started, submission, definition, core, the core schedules, the claim reports, budget reports, supplementals, utility function, and each one of those subjects has more detail about each topic. So we definitely will recommend using that to help get you through the new process. With that being said, this does end our session. And just before you leave, I just want to make sure that everyone takes the post survey after the event. It'll help us make these trainings better. The webinar has been recorded and will be posted online shortly. An email will be sent out to notify everyone of the location. So it's going to be on YouTube underneath the OPWDD page. But we will send out a link to everyone on here, as well as everyone that we have listed as a contact in our database. Also, the Q&As will be carefully reviewed and answers will be posted online as soon as possible. So I will leave the webinar or the WebEx event open for probably about 5 to 10 minutes after I stop talking. And just make sure you get in all the questions that you want to get answered, and we'll review those, and we will provide an answer that everyone can see. So we'll post that online. So once again, I want to thank you, and good luck.